Good afternoon, dear delegates. Thank you for being invited to Microfinance South Africa's conference. It's unusual times, but it's still a privilege to be here. I think we've all come to terms with this new media, and we are making the best of the situation. I want to talk to you a little bit about authenticated collections, or DebiCheck. And I don't think there's a better context provided to talk about the topic than the topic for the conference, which is grit. Now, I paged through the book a little bit, and it was interesting that my eye fell on the fact that grit actually comes to play in several instances, and in my mind, it basically translates to effort. Now, if you think about success at the end, success with anything, it's the effort plus the talent that first of all gives you the skill. But then it's again effort together with the skill that actually gives you success at the end. So it's interesting that grit or effort actually comes to play twice. And I would like to, together with you, investigate authenticated collections, our successes, our failures. And I think the posit that I actually want to hold to you is that not enough effort has probably gone into this. And a lot more is actually required before we're actually going to be successful. And just again, bear in mind that effort actually comes to play twice. And I think also in this case. I think the first effort required here today is us stepping away a little bit, understanding DebiCheck, understanding authenticated collections perhaps from a slightly different vantage point. The sense I'm getting is that we are sometimes just getting too myopic about DebiCheck and what we see and the successes or the failures that we actually sometimes observe. So I think we need to make a few points, perhaps pertinently, in DebiCheck. The first one I want to make by virtue of this slide. And if you look at the slide, you'll basically recognize the traditional parties at play: the user, the sponsoring bank, the paying bank, and then also the consumer at the end of it. And we must recognize the fact that DebiCheck is a four-party model that is truly bringing all four of these parties together in a payment system and actually requires behavioral acts from each of them. It very strongly brings the consumer into the picture and requires the consumer to act in terms of the DebiCheck mandate that is sent to the consumer. I think that we've underestimated the amount of behavioral friction and all the variables that actually sits in this equation, especially in that last leg, the leg between the paying bank and the consumer. And I think especially if we think that we would have gotten control over all of those variables to such an extent that it can replace another payment system where there's none of those behavioral frictions, where there's only technical friction points, and that it could fully step into the place of another payment system. And obviously you know I'm referring to ADO and ADO in this case. Then I think we've made perhaps a thinking flaw or an assumption that is quite stretched to actually imagine all of that. So I want to make the point that AC is a very different system. It comes with very different variables. Our control over these variables will be limited. We might see some successes, but we will never get to the level where we would say we'll have got full control over all the variables in this payment system to such an extent that this can be a full replacement of, let's say, for instance, an ADO payment system. I think that's one of the important aspects that we have to recognize in this system. And if we then adopt a little bit of a less myopic approach, I think recognize the difficulty and the challenges that actually sits in that space, and also the effort that will be required in that space. And I'll come back to that in a moment or two. I think everybody knows this is a very complex system, and I think the next slide introduces perhaps some of the complexity, and you would see the complexity in this payment system, specifically related to the many or the significant number of messages per transaction type that are suddenly flowing between a user and a sponsoring bank, and that is adding complexity and adding multiple points of possible failure. So no wonder it is going to take us time to actually stabilize the system. We've built a very complex system here. It's got many, many flows. It's got many, many message types, and all of them introduce multiple points of failure. Together with that, we've got the challenge of the behavioral component, the component with the consumer, that adds immense behavioral friction to this payment system. I think if you then step away a little bit and say, you know, how far are we, what's likely to happen, how long will this thing actually mature? I think I can say we may get the technical parts right perhaps sooner than we think. Hopefully, in the next couple of months, we'll get control over the multiple failure points that we still see in terms of message flows, specifically around outstanding responses. But technically, I think the system can be stable fairly soon. That doesn't make a promise that we will get control over all the variables, especially those that sits on the behavioral side of things. So let's look at some of the statistics. How far have we done? How good have we done so far? I think it's fair to say that we are seeing good volumes coming through the system. I personally would have expected a little bit better by this time, but from about May till about October, this time now, we see that most of the volumes on most of the transaction types, including collections, have almost tripled. That's a good sign. If we look at some of the technical successes, we see good technical success, generally just below the 90% on overall mandate initiation, and I think not better than 90 at this stage, particularly because we've got one problem with regards to TT1 delayed that makes the figures actually look worse than they should be. But I think some very good signs as well. We see 99% technical success on TT2 mandate initiation. On TT1 real time, we see 95% technical success. On TT3, 97%. As I indicated, it's basically on the delayed side where we picked up a few problems that makes the figures look worse than it actually is. It's on the business success side where the picture is not that rosy. In general, I think we can say we round about a 25% business success. Some areas looks good. Again, TT3 looks very positive. TT1, the real-time mandate initiation, also quite positive. You know, we are looking at success rates, business success rates, already in excess of 30%. But this is the point I want to make, and that is to say, perhaps this is not enough effort, and we'll have to put in more effort. Now, I think the first question you're going to ask us is the solutions that you've built working? And I want to put my neck out here today and say, I think they are working, but I don't think we understand all the many co-producers that actually makes it look as if it's not working. I can't explain it better than perhaps on this slide. And I think if you focus on the pie chart for the moment, and this is about USSD success, you would notice that there are actually quite a number of factors that co-produce a situation where it looks as if USSD is not giving us the kind of success that we're looking at. First of all, let's talk about contactability. We know contactability is a big issue, and we've sized the problem, and currently we can say about 87% of flows do not have a contactability problem. But there is still, in other words, a significant portion, let's call it a 13% portion, that can be ascribed to, I just don't have the phone, or I'm not corresponding with the right kind of telephone or cell phone number on the other side. That aside, if we've dealt with that, there is a significant portion of the flows that then actually is authenticated. So if you look at the pie chart, the blue in the pie chart basically depicts that the portion that is already authenticated. But look at the orange part. That is just a huge, perhaps unacceptable high number. And we're talking about USSD TT1 specifically, an unacceptable number of no responses, haven't responded to the USSD. And in this case, we know the technical flows happened. There's no failures, not even with the MNOs. So there's an area for us to start to focus on and to leverage. If you look at some of the others that are also co-producing the problem, the gray part that you see there on the pie chart indicates specific problems that we are seeing with one of the MNOs, specifically, where USSD are just kept open, and therefore we can't respond further than from the first USSD flow that has happened. Now that's a problem that we need to fix with one particular MNO. And I think they're aware of that when we are engaging them. And it contributes to about 18% of the problem that you actually see around USSDs. Now, having fixed that, we still sit with a number of remaining problems. There's still a portion of voice over LTE that contributes to about 9% of the problem. But even if we fix that, there's still a number of other factors. Like, for instance, 7% of instances, there are technical failures between handset and tower. And then there's still a similar portion, the green that you see there, that is just handsets not switched on by the consumer. So what is the point I want to make from all of this? Is that there's not one single problem that actually contributes to USSDs so-called not working as it should. There are many things co-producing the problem, each one adding a little bit of a percentage. We know that. We've got our hands around on all the data. If you ask me today to build you a new solution, brand new, I would probably be able to cut one or two of those slices out of the problem, but the rest of the problem still remains. So the point I want to make is, I think more effort is needed to actually enhance what we have, to make it better, before we jump to a conclusion that says something else needs to be built, something else is going to be the silver bullet that's going to take us into the sunset with regards to this particular solution. So I think the reality of AC then is there are a number of things that we need to do, and we are doing a number of things. But there's not one single silver bullet that's actually going to provide us the solution that we are looking for. There will always be another sliver and another sliver and another sliver ascribed to something that would be part of the problem. No solution at this stage would be able to actually fulfill all of these things magically today. The effort required is to actually squeeze a little bit out of every segment that you see there on the pie chart. The biggest effort, however, is on that orange part that you see there, because that is where behavioral friction lies. And I can indicate to you, perhaps through some of the research that we've done, how big that problem is. And I would like to focus our attention on the effort that is actually required on this scale at this point in time. Let's look at that. If you look at a flow that has happened successfully, and at this stage, we can say 64% of all USSDs do successfully flow through to the user. Is it good? No, sure not. But I mean, we're going to add another 18% to that 64 very shortly, and another 7% and another bit here and another bit there. But this transaction then having flowed is being ignored. And that is what our research is indicating us, that in 62% of instances, the consumer just decided not to respond. And the interesting part about this research is this speaks to non-face-to-face as well as face-to-face type transactions. Even where an agent is available, sitting across the person, there's still instances where the person has decided not to respond, and the agent is quite happy with that. So the hypothesis that more effort is required, especially to guide consumers through a sales effort, through the mandate initiation process, is most definitely an hypothesis that I think stack up and stand up at this point in time. More effort is needed. If we then also look at another interesting statistic, and that is, so I've spoken to the agent, I decided not to respond. Did I receive the product? In many cases, the product was anyway given. So I would say the 30% that we are seeing around business success does not at this stage resemble best effort. Because consumers get their products, consumer is happy, fall back to another payment system to collect, and situation is solved. Can we therefore improve the 30%? Oh, most definitely. If you think about putting more of an effort into trying to make the authentication a condition of actually getting the product, following up, putting more of an effort in, I think all of that speaks to the fact that that there's lots that can be done actually. Another and the last interesting statistic is, have we really put the necessary effort in guiding people through what DebiCheck is? Why is it a good thing for you? Well, how does it protect you? At this stage, 83% of people contacted through this consumer survey has indicated they don't even know what DebiCheck is. That's after the effort, after the sales effort, after a so-called DebiCheck transaction was attempted. More effort is needed. So I would like to perhaps conclude on a few things, but before we go to this slide, just a few general thoughts perhaps. There's a lot for us to do. There's a lot of effort that the banks still need to put in to stabilize the system. I don't deny that. There's a lot of effort that we need to do to squeeze all we can out of every co-producing sliver out of that pie chart that I've showed you. I don't deny that. You know, we must all put our best effort in that. At this point in time, does it require us to go and rebuild or rethink something? Perhaps too quick to at this stage say that. Unless we get to something that can take all the behavioral friction away at once. And we need to think creatively whether such options do exist. We have now, as a banking industry, introduced registered mandate services. The system is successfully tested. It's in production now. We are starting to see the volumes coming through. In my mind, registered mandate services will be with us for a while. It's an ISO 20022 system. It's linked to AC, and your attempt to actually attempt an AC transaction first. But all is not lost if you receive a no response for some other reason. The mandate is registered. Can we do more with registered mandate services? I do think that is possible. I do think we can think about ways in which a registered mandate service can be ripened or matured to actually become an authenticated solution. With time and with several attempts, with education and with effort also from the paying banks, I do think that is possible. There is perhaps an area where we can say we can do several background things. We can do many things that potentially reduces the behavioral friction that doesn't require an act necessary from the consumer that could potentially qualify or ripen this mandate to become an authenticated mandate. Whether that's going to stack up with the Reserve Bank in their definition of an authenticated solution or with our members, I think that still needs to be seen. But I do think registered mandate services has potential. I do think it's going to stay with us for a while. So far, the SARB has not determined any sunset date for registered mandate services. They are quite specific in registered mandate services having a second priority, not a first priority. We'll have to see through the independent reviews and through the interactions we have whether that situation could be addressed, whether we could get a temporary resolution perhaps around that. I think the jury is still out. But I do think registered mandate services is there. And it's there to assist us for quite a while. I think then, lastly, whilst we speak of grit and effort, we've got to ask ourselves, is everybody putting the effort into getting onto the system? Now, at this stage, in terms of the top users of the system, the top 20% users that are responsible for 80% of the NADO and ADO flows, we basically can say that more than 80%, very close to 88% of them, are either in production, or they are piloting in production, or they are busy with some other component to actually get the service introduced very soon. It's only about 9%, a little bit less than that, that actually really is not coming to the party at this stage. I'm not sure if the picture looks the same, but I think that's another place where effort is needed. Effort is needed for us to kind of get onto the system, to try the system, to know that registered mandate service exists, that it gives us some of the functionality that we actually get in an ADO and an ADO. Effort is needed to actually get into the system in time. before it's too late and before Ada or Renada is sunset and you're not ready for that. So I think I would like to conclude and say the authenticated collections situation is with us, but it requires us, I think, to stand back, to understand that there are many variables, many of them behavioral, that we need to get control over. There's not one single bullet that is actually going to suddenly be a magical technical solution that is actually going to get us in that situation very quickly. We'll have to stick it out. We'll have to apply the necessary grit. We'll have to apply more effort. My sense is we don't see best effort yet, and we require best effort at this point in time. I think I would like to end off then with this slide that you see on the screen there. And I think this comes from a completely different angle, and it basically says, how do you actually become successful, especially in the tough times that we are living into today? Now, I don't know many people know that, but I'm also a behavioral scientist, and sometimes I do pick up the books, and sometimes I rediscover truths that are applicable in situations like this today, where effort is required, that I think we need to just again face. And I was struck by the fact that how our thinking sometimes blocks us from actually accessing the opportunities, the logical reasoning, the ability for creativity, for thinking about solutions in smart ways, for intelligence to actually come to play. And how we are sometimes almost circuited or wired in a particular way to act to situations in ways that is not always optimal. Now, what you see in that picture is the recognition of two types of the brain, or two portions of the brain. The one is the limbic system. That's where your ability for quick reaction sits. And this stems from earlier times, when we were still required to flight or to run away from something or to freeze and be still in situations. And that part of the brain is important, and it protects us from many situations in the past. And even today, when something immediately happens, in milliseconds, that part of the brain actually helps you to respond. But sometimes in those flight and freeze and fight responses, in that immediate revert to that red brain, we also find a blockage to a better way of solving a problem. When you freeze in a situation, the more sophisticated way is I'm avoiding situations. I'm catastrophizing something as, oh, it's going to be a mess. I'm not going to participate in it. When you flight from something, it is again, I'm avoiding, I'm running away. I try to disassociate from this. When you fight a situation, it's often, I want to destroy this. I'm angry. I want to oppose it. And that's not always the best way to actually apply best effort from. Best effort sometimes comes from the blue brain. That's the front part of the brain, the neocortex. That's where the ability for thinking, for creativity, for problem resolution and so on sits. Sometimes you just have to pause that red brain a little bit. And one of the most wonderful abilities we as humans have is metacognition. Is the ability to kind of pause ourselves for a moment, ask ourselves what's happening. Am I acting from the red brain? Am I acting from the blue brain? And I would like to hold to you, in times like this, where it's difficult, where pressure is real, where it's in your face, where your business is at threat, Don't revert to the red brain. Don't write off certain things that is realities and go the way of the flight response or the freeze response or the fight response. Try and access the potential that sits in the blue brain to work the problem, to think about the problem, to find ways in which your own business can apply a better effort in making something like DebiCheck work. I wish you all the success with your conference. I hope together with me, we've learned the importance of effort, of grit, especially in these times. And I hope together with me, you understand the need for effort in DebiCheck. And I really want to invite you all to apply best effort, to squeeze every little bit of every little co-producer of the problem that we still see, to accept it for what it is. It is a regulatory imposed thing. It is not necessarily making perfect commercial sense at this stage from all sides. It has many, many advantages. Let's make it work. Let's squeeze a little bit out of every co-producing factor that contributes to failure or contributes to friction. Let's apply best effort. Thank you.